The serial killer, Albert Fish. Albert Fish was born as Hamilton Howard Fish in Washington, D.C. on 19 May 1870. Most of his family members had a standing history of mental instability. For example, his uncle suffered from religious obsession, a brother was admitted in a mental hospital, another brother had suffered from hydrocephalus, which had made him to pass on. More so, his sister had a mental affliction, 3 other close relatives suffered from chronic mental illnesses, and his mother was believed to suffer frequent oral and/or visual hallucinations. Fish's mother, forced to look for another source of livelihood due to her inability to take care of her son following the death of his father, took him to St. John's Orphanage in Washington. While here, Albert together with other boys could be frequently battered and whipped in front of one another by their teachers. He eventually came to relish physical pain from the communal beatings and related sadistic acts of brutality. By 1880, his mother got a fairly better government job and was able to take care of him. However, his behavior started to take a negative twist, more so due to the kind of relationships he established. For instance, he adopted weird practices like taking human urine and visiting public baths where he could watch other boys undress. By 1890, Fish had arrived in New York City, where he became a male prostitute and at the same time began defiling and murdering young boys, a crime he kept committing not necessarily seeking sexual gratification, but because he enjoyed feeding on flesh of children. First incarceration. Even after starting his professional life as a house painter, Fish's appetite for assaulting young children, especially boys, continued to grow. Moreover, his attention turned to mentally ill men, with a case in point being the relationship he had with a mentally impaired man who at a given time he attempted to castrate. As if this was not enough, Fish started visiting brothels frequently, where he could be whipped and flogged. And in 1903, he was arrested for embezzlement and was sentenced to incarceration in Sing Sing. In 1917, Fish's wife left him for John Straub, a rejection that caused him to start indulging in self-harm. For instance, he would always insert pins in his groin and removing them, a behavior that persisted until he could no longer remove the pins he had inserted. Moreover, his psychological problems that involved illusions and hallucinations grew, so much that he began to abduct, castrate, and torture young boys, a practice he claimed to have been directed by spiritual voices. Early attacks and attempted abductions. Fish happened to commit his first attack on a child, Thomas Bedden, in the years 1910, and 9 years later, he stabbed a mentally retarded boy in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. However, the most astonishing case was witnessed in the 1920s when Fish turned cannibal by kidnapping, killing and subsequently feeding on flesh of a 10-year girl. Apparently, many of his intended victims would be either mentally disturbed or Black Americans. However, his efforts to murder Beatrice Keel were futile when the latter's parents noticed his ill intentions and kept him off. Second incarceration, arrest and trial. Fish remarried in 1930 in New York. However, this marriage could not as well last for long as he eventually divorced his wife within 7 days of marriage. In addition, Fish was later arrested in May 1930 for sending an obscene letter to a woman who answered an advertisement for a maid. This was after a psychiatric observation, Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital, in 1930 and 1931 for observation, following his arrests. But 2 years before this, Ford had kidnapped Grace Butt, which led him to be arrested 6 years later. Fish's trial started in 1935, during which he defended himself, alleging that he was insane. After much examination and trial, he was found both guilty and sane by the jury, after which he was sentenced to death, followed by an execution a year later. Underlying cause for the evidence for the cause of Albert Fish's behavior. An analysis of Alvin Ford serial killer's case is very closely related to that of Albert Fish. In 1986, the United States Supreme Court used Florida's procedure for determining mental competency for execution as a test case for banning execution of the mentally ill. Indeed, under Ford v. Wainwright, the Eighth Amendment prohibits the state from inflicting a penalty of death upon a prisoner who is insane. Although Florida's procedure may now be constitutional on its face, in practice, Florida continues to execute the mentally ill. In 1974, Florida charged Alvin Ford with murder, after which he was sentenced to death. At the trial level, Ford raised no competency issues, but after imprisonment, he showed symptoms of delusion, confusion, and psychosis. A 14-month examination by a defense psychiatrist revealed that Ford was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia with suicide potential that hindered him the potential to defend his life. Other 3 governor-appointed psychiatrists examined him for only 30 minutes and discovered that, although he exhibited mental disorder, he understood his total situation, including his death penalty and the implications thereof. After the defense psychiatrist examined Ford, he concluded that Ford suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. However, although the examination of other 3 governor-appointed psychiatrists revealed that Ford suffered from mental disorder, they concluded that he understood his total situation, including his penalty and its implications. When the case reached the Supreme Court, the court's plurality observed that no states allow the execution of mentally retarded persons. The justice, in concurrence with Ford, suggested a procedure used by Florida today that does not require full sanity prior to execution and an individual's need to assist the counsel in his or her defense. Even though the court left the standard and procedures open-ended, it clearly indicated that Florida's procedure totally violated the 8th Amendment in 3 ways. 1. By denying the prisoner a mechanism to challenge the findings and impeach the findings of the governor-appointed psychiatrists. 2. By placing the entire competency determination in the hands of the governor, and 3. By preventing the condemned from playing any relevant role in the quest for truth. Conclusion. In comparison to Albert Fish's case, Dempsey termed Fish as a psychological phenomenon. Psychiatrist Wortham also examined and found Fish to be obsessed with religion, cannibalism, and communion. Fish himself pleaded insanity. However, although the jury found him sane and guilty, the reports and examinations from other psychiatrists rendering him insane should have been put into accurate consideration. Fish's activities totally reveal that he was mentally retarded, and if this is true, then the jury totally violated the United States Supreme Court's 8th Amendment. This essay on the serial killer Albert Fish was written and submitted by user Julio S. to help you with your own studies. You are free to use it for research and reference purposes in order to write your own paper. However, you must cite it accordingly.